Hello, bonjour, and miigwech. Welcome to Wading Through Economic Filth or Wealth of Nation. This is where I seek to explain things going on in the Canadian and global economies. My name is Greg Quinn. I've spent the last 2 decades as a business reporter in Ottawa. I have a master's degree in economics and in journalism. I'm trying to merge those things into this evolving world of media tech at a time of rising disinformation. I also wrote a book, Crisis and Calm, which hopefully you see behind me. It's about the work of Canada's central bank. Inflation and affordability have dominated society in the last few years. The Bank of Canada is a big part of the picture when it comes to those topics. But my topic for today is on productivity and the wrong message often being sent to the public. For economists, productivity is a beautiful thing. It's almost magical. Yet business leaders and economists often put it across in a very negative way. The basic definition is the amount of valuable work that's done over a certain period of time, usually thought about in an hour or a year's time. In other words, the more productive you are, the more valuable things you get done in a day, and ultimately you will get paid more for that. This is in contrast to economics, which is often called the dismal science. It's called the dismal science because most forms of production, as they ramp up, tend to require more effort to get the same amount of production. This is because materials end up costing more as the supplies get tighter, workers demand overtime pay, or the machinery tends to break down more as it's getting used or overused. So in other words, for many tasks at a broad level, the more we do something, the more expensive it gets to produce it. This is what makes economics dismal as opposed to the natural sciences where some forces seem to be almost unlimited or strictly mechanical. But for economists, productivity is just about finding new ways to do things better. To take it to an absurd level, imagine as soon as your feet hit the floor in the morning, your boss calls you to say you've already done an outstanding job and you're getting a raise. In reality, productivity often looks more like a faster running laptop that allows you to do more tasks in a day. It may look like a training course that helps you become more valuable in your own work and to your company. Yet the popular portrayal of productivity often seems to take the opposite view, that it's something punitive. It's your boss coming in and asking you to work late tonight, or simply to work harder to get the same results. This is not the way economists should be looking at it, or the way Canada should be looking at it. But in some ways, we have clearly fallen behind other countries, and the United States in particular, on output per worker. Some of this is because that over the course of a year, U.S. workers tend to put in more hours. So the annual productivity figures can be a bit misleading. It makes them look like they're just more productive in the sense that economists think of, when in fact they've simply worked more hours. But it's also clear that Canada's place in the world has eroded because of the leadership of other countries on inventing and embracing new digital technologies. Economists have found that firms in Canada are now spending less than 70 cents per every dollar that U.S. companies spend on equipment. That's according to the OECD and the C.D. Howe Institute. And that figure for Canada has fallen greatly over time. It's not really clear why that is, but I can get into some possible reasons later. There is some good news around this. When Canada compiles its own productivity data, the first figures are often quite bleak, and then over time as they get revised, the gap between us and the US is often revised. So a lot of the headlines you see about the latest productivity figures for Canada aren't really going to hold up in the bad way we see them. There has also been some research in the last couple of years suggesting that Canada's lack of headline productivity is really linked to the oil sands in particular, and perhaps other resource industries. And this appears to be because of the physical limits of extracting. The more you dig, the deeper you dig, the more expensive it becomes, the less lucrative the deposits might be. Some other studies over a longer period of time that have suggested that in competitive manufacturing industries heavily reliant on trade, Canadian workers have more or less kept up with the US. So to get Shakespearean about this, the fault in our so-called weaker productivity may not be in ourselves, but in the stars or the mines. Another issue from a mathematical point of view is productivity figures aren't one single number. It's not like counting the number of cans of soup in your cupboard. It's a ratio, a fraction, with a numerator and denominator. So the top line is one series linked to Canada's output or gross domestic product. The bottom line is the number of hours worked. And even though those numbers are trillions of dollars or hundreds of millions of hours worked in a year across Canada, small shifts in those labor series can mean a great deal in what the productivity number or ratio shows up. Standard productivity might be something like 2% a year. Less than that would be considered quite weak, but getting up to 5% could be quite large. But as you can imagine, when you fiddle around, especially with the number at the bottom, the number of hours of work, it can really lead to exaggerated swings in productivity in any short-term period of time. Now, that is not to say Canada's productivity gains have been anything to write home about over a longer period. It just means that some of the short-term swings can be a little bit off. One thing that gives us some optimism in Canada is that the IMF said our internal trade barriers are quite large and there's something that can be remediated. They have calculated that trade barriers between provinces in Canada can be the equivalent of a tariff of 9% on average across the economy, and in some industries it's as high as 40%. Repairing those could boost Canada's annual GDP by more than 5%. So one thing that's made me think hard is the question of, if we're distressed about Donald Trump's tariffs of 25% or 50%, there are industries where we could eliminate on our own a 40% tariff. The other issue is we're asking the United States to sign a comprehensive free trade agreement, and Canadian provinces won't even sign a free trade agreement with each other. I mean, it's kind of a weakness in what we're arguing on the global stage. There's some other bad news around this. Canada's political leaders so far have been patting themselves on the back for targeting certain high-profile products like beer and wine, or they've signed bilateral provincial deals, often along regional or partisan lines. But there is no prize in the global marketplace for half measures. Deals between Liberals or Conservative premiers or Western provinces or Eastern provinces do not matter on the global stage. But there is a clear penalty for Canada remaining uncompetitive and failing to create a truly free trade marketplace across our entire nation. We also have some substantial inertia on other policies. Canada's tax system and culture have long favored small companies, and they are often less competitive and productive than large firms that are more able to specialize to become productive. Think about a firm with 5 employees. They're unlikely to have sophisticated human resources or lawyers or even accounting expertise in-house that would make them work better or reduce their costs, let alone senior managers that could spend a lot of their time thinking about how to make existing operations more productive. And small companies simply lack the capacity and the know-how to win the large contracts that could underpin bigger production runs that would lead to even more efficiencies or to boost their revenue and payrolls more substantially. The other bad news is we spent decades developing narrow tax credits and incentives for parts of the economy that aren't that productive. Think of all the subsidies and treats given out to help Canadians pay more and more to buy the same houses without boosting supply. That is money that is being diverted from your paychecks and from business profits. We've also brought in a lot of tax breaks that favor small companies that, again, are just less productive. The good news is these are all things that we can control, and we also have a lot of resources that are in great demand across the world right now. So maybe go out there and ask your boss about getting new equipment to make you more productive. Go ask your elected officials why our tax money is going to narrow objectives and narrow trade deals that aren't going to get you a nice raise. Before I go, I'd like to offer up 2 books that deal a lot with productivity. The first is Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. That's been around since 1776 and is the foundation for modern market economics. The second is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a very good look at how to serve the customer best and also do the best job you can to get the best pay you can. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll see you again soon.